Okay, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm going to be talking to you about an intelligence you probably haven't heard much about yet, called spiritual intelligence. And I would argue that spiritual intelligence is a crucial set of skills for the hero's journey. In fact, I would argue that it is for all of us, and certainly has been for me, a roadmap in the direction of nobility. How I got interested in this is a little bit of an odd story. I came out of college hyper-educated, a big believer in IQ. I went to work for a major oil company, and after about a year of working there, I started getting some performance feedback. It basically went like this: Cindy, we get it that you're really smart. We get it that you're really hardworking. However, you are somewhat annoying. You might want to consider developing some interpersonal skills. Now, when engineers tell you that you need to develop some interpersonal skills, you probably should do that. So I started on the work which we would now call emotional intelligence skill building. That work was not available yet, which was too bad. It would have helped me a lot. But I sort of stumbled my way through this process of learning how to have better interpersonal skills. And then I came into a leadership position that was the most challenging leadership position I had ever had. It coincided with a life crisis. But fortunately, I had been doing a lot of what I would now call spiritual intelligence work outside of the business. Those skills got me through that period of history in a way that I was able to lead with more grace than I had ever led before. And this puzzled me because it wasn't brain power that got me through. In a sense, it was getting out of my own way that made me successful. It was humility. So I became curious about this because I worked in human resources and we did leadership development, and this particular type of intelligence did not seem to be described in the leadership literature, and it didn't even seem to be something we could talk about because it had this word spiritual attached to it, which was just kind of creepy, right? You don't talk about that in the workplace. So I got very interested in what if there was a legitimate way that we could describe this set of skills that I had been learning outside of a business setting, but which clearly had relevance inside of a business setting. So eventually I left my job and dedicated myself to the research I'm going to summarize for you today. To begin with a new intelligence, the first thing you need to do is to have exemplars in that field that you can point to and look at and consider what makes them different. So I would ask you to think about who are the people that you know of from history who you most admire. Who are the noblest human beings? Who are your personal heroes? You might call them spiritual leaders or wisdom teachers or saints or sages. But think about at least one person that you admire. Now, think about what makes that person different. What is beyond IQ and what is beyond EQ that makes them different? I've asked this question now to thousands of people, and I get fairly consistent characteristics that people will list. And this is a partial list of the kinds of words that people will say they admire about these heroes. They admire them because they are courageous, they are visionary, they are inspiring, they are selfless, humble, loving, and wise. Do any of these words sound like the people you had in your mind? Do any of these words sound dangerous for a business? Actually, I've asked a lot of business leaders that question, and most business leaders say they would love to have more of this inside their business. So what if there was a way that we could describe this? How would we summarize? What would be the highest level? Now, the definition you heard Todd read earlier that I have for spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. That is made possible by a very important singular shift, and it is described in these two slides. We are moving away from being immature egos where we're all about our small s self and all about personal self-interest, and instead moving to a larger, wiser ego, an ego that has developed through the stages of adult development maturity and is now guided by our higher nature, our internal hero, if you will. What I am telling you is I believe there is a legitimate additional intelligence and that it matters a great deal. Beyond IQ and beyond EQ, I believe there is another describable intelligence called spiritual intelligence. You might wonder, how could this possibly be a legitimate field of research? And I will tell you, I had the exact same kind of Vulcan mindset approaching this. I'm a Star Trek fan. And I thought, if I'm ever going to take this back into an environment where people are appropriately skeptical, this has to meet PhD level of rigor from the beginning. So we have hired PhDs to create an assessment of spiritual intelligence, psychometrically sound, carefully validated, and cross-correlated with an assessment of adult maturity, which has been proven to be related to leadership effectiveness. The key differentiator here from maybe some previous topics that have been close to this is that we've been very careful with the diversity arena to stay skills focused. We stay out of belief territory. Your beliefs are your beliefs. We are interested in behaviors and we are interested in skills. This is the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence that we have described, attempting to show what is different about those heroes, those noblest human beings that we were mentioning earlier. Something that is different from IQ and EQ. Now, I know this is a little hard to read, so we had some handouts on the chairs to kind of help you with this, but I'll walk you through a few of these. Essentially, in the upper left quadrant, you have the skills of ego self and higher self-awareness, higher self, capital S. It includes being aware of your own values and your values hierarchy, you're being aware of your life purpose, and being aware and able to hear the voice of your higher self. And I'll explain that one in more detail in a moment. In the second quadrant, you have the skills of universal awareness. It means, can you really deeply understand the interconnectedness of all life? Can you see the worldviews of other people with humility and wisdom? Can you perceive time and history in a larger way? Are you aware of how limited your normal human perception is? And then in quadrant 3, we get to skills like being able to live from your higher self, being able to sustain faith in tough times. Fabulous skills. And in the fourth quadrant, we receive the benefit of the previous 3 quadrants. The fourth quadrant is the outcome quadrant. It's a very important quadrant, so it is blown up here a little easier to see. Social mastery and spiritual presence. These skills include being a wise and effective mentor, being a wise and effective leader, making compassionate and wise decisions, being a calming and healing presence in the world, and being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. Would you like to have some more of these? Yes, wouldn't we all? In a way, I wrote this for myself, right? I needed the roadmap. So if you're going to get started on a journey, you need to know how to go, like what are the steps? And in any intelligence, you need to be able to describe each intelligence from the novice level to the expert level. And we have done that for all 21 of these skills, from the white belt to the black belt. Here's a sample skill. Skill 5, a particularly important one, awareness of ego self and higher self. At level 1, you have merely a cognitive awareness that an ego self exists and has been shaped by your experience of life. That's all that's needed. At level 2, you can observe your own ego in operation. At level 3, you have been observing your own ego for long enough that you're starting to recognize its patterns. You're recognizing which situations tend to trigger you. At level 4, you have cultivated the ability to consistently hear the voice of your higher self. The voice of our higher nature is the quieter voice. The ego tends to be the louder voice. So it takes some time and some spiritual practice or journaling or effort of personal growth to be able to learn to hear your higher self. And at level 5, ego is now in joyful service to higher self. The tug of war between these two is over. Now, I like to say I experience about 5 minutes of that a year, but it's the saintly level. All right. What about your call to the hero's journey? I believe that those noble people that you thought of when I asked you that question earlier are actually coming through your higher self as a call forward to live in that direction. That is your true north, that's your compass. What you admire is, in a way, what you seek. Does this make sense? Yes. So your higher self is calling you to your own hero's journey, and you can be more like those kinds of people by virtue of having these intelligences described for you. I believe that the hero's journey is ultimately not about where we go. It is about who we become. So how do we start? I think this is a good place. I love this photograph. It represents for me the attitude of humble curiosity that I think if each of us could bring to life, we would be so much wiser. Are we willing to turn our perception upside down? Are we willing to look at things completely differently than we have looked at them before? And what might we learn from that? I will tell you that I have a very personal, powerful practice that I've developed through this study. And it involves asking a couple of questions. The first question provides the most powerful shift for me. And that first question is, when you do something irritating, what would it take for me to do that exact same behavior? And I will tell you, my ego will immediately resist the question and go, I would never do that. But I have to push back at it, because the truth is, if I were in your exact life circumstances and I had your biology and your history, I would probably do the same thing. I need to kind of get over myself. So this is the help me get over myself question. What would it take for me to do this exact same behavior? This opens my heart and opens my mind and prepares me for the next question, which I would say is the hero's question. What is the noblest thing to do in this situation? What is the high IQ, EQ, and SQ thing to do in this situation? Thinking back to my true north, my heroes, what would that person do in this situation? The reason I care so passionately about this is that it has really, in a sense, been my very personal journey. I wanted to understand how to be a better person. Once I figured out IQ was not the whole story, I wanted to know what the whole story was. And so if EQ wasn't it, then what was? And SQ seemed for me to help map out the pathway that I wanted to take. It also brings me hope that as we map these skills and research these skills, that we collectively might raise our spiritual intelligence. Thank you very much.